English translation, 136th contact, Part 1, Tuesday, 14th of October 1980, 23:41 hours.
I am tremendously glad that you came.
Last week, we did not have enough time, I know. You still wanted to discuss some things with me. Now is the time.
It concerns our quite precarious financial situation. I wanted to ask you in this connection whether or not my idea is a good one, which is that we look for work that we can perform ourselves at home so that we do not only have to work outside.
Certainly, the idea is of good value, but it might not be able to be realized as quickly as what is indeed necessary for you.
And why not?
Are you yourself aware of the full consequences of your serious financial situation?
Recently, I handed you a list with the request that you would look this over and then give us the appropriate advice.
We have surely already done this. And my advice that was given last week concerning these interests corresponded to our detailed examination of the facts.
Yes, and?
Are you really not aware of all of the consequences?
In recent months, I have no longer occupied myself with the financial situation. I only did this last week because there were bills to pay for which no money was available.
And of course, you have paid them back with funds that you have borrowed, as I know. It is high time that the group members remove Elsie from the financial sector and that you learn to take over this matter.
I see that you have already contemplated this again. Then now you must know this well.
It is not right how you act. You are the one who, in every respect, does the most important and comprehensive and rigorous work. And furthermore, you have accumulated a financial debt on your behalf, just so that you can keep everyone who would be responsible for the building of the center and all things from sinking. This is in no wise right and is very regrettable. As we have calculated, today, a debt rests upon you which lies on the border of 90,000 francs. And all this for expenses that must basically go to the expense of the group members, who also have a large financial debt to be repaid themselves, together with ongoing expenses.
We are neither your financial geniuses nor rich.
Nevertheless, the budget should have been led differently before it came as far as it stands today. Everything can now only be saved by a radical measure, which must also begin already in the month of November. If this date is not kept, then it will still take, at the latest, 6 months before the collapse finally becomes unavoidable, because the debt repayment rates will rise immeasurably for you. Already in the month of November, you must apply a monthly average of around 7,500 francs towards the necessary payments and the debt repayments. This amount, however, will unstoppably increase each additional month for you if you cannot collect it, whereby the amount mentioned is to be paid monthly for about 6 years. Still, you will be able to make this payment. However, it represents the outermost limit of your capabilities if our advice concerning the work is followed, as I explained last week. In addition to this, you are to be concerned with procuring work, including any that can be performed at the center during any free minutes. Otherwise, the required amount will not be reached. In addition to all of this, it is necessary that you finally take the financial management into your own hands and regulate everything in the best manner. This is the only manner in which you can be saved from this serious situation and overcome the difficulties. You only have about 3 weeks of time to begin the necessary financing in order to be able to regulate everything and lead it to success. This means that you need to take all of the financing away from Elsie, because she does not understand anything about this, but only manages the debt in a thoughtless manner.
Okay, a counter-speech would probably be senseless. Nevertheless, I would like to say that the accounting should be led further by Evi under my control, while Jacobus keeps his office as treasurer. That would already help me tremendously.
Nothing is to be objected if you maintain control over this. What you absolutely still have to do, however, is this. Set aside tomorrow or the following day and gather all data and facts, in order then to prepare an exact account with a budget plan and the payback possibilities. Then, submit to me your exact plan, and I will then get together with a friend for advice if necessary, one who is concerned with such earthly matters.
And where should I find this friend then?
This concerns a friend on my end, one from our own ranks.
Oh, and you think that he might be able to advise me?
Surely, because he has concerned himself for 4 months with the earthly financial system.
And he thinks that...
You forget that completely different learning opportunities are offered to us.
Oh, of course, I forgot, but I will strive in a good manner and after the best opportunities toward this unpleasant task, even if I completely have to go against the grain. But I would still like to say that I want to form a group within the group, with which I can carry out this work, and I could exercise control over it. My experience tells me that in such things, a certain caution must be taken because only too quickly, one can fall under the suspicion of the Earth humans that one pushes his finances into their own pockets. Indeed, I already have enough enemies who, only too gladly, would want to slide such machinations into my shoes.
Sure, I understand your desire, and it is not so unreasonable. Similar things have already repeatedly been imputed to you by several group members.
Exactly, but despite everything there will be a problem, namely Elsie. I doubt whether her reasoning in her own stubbornness is sufficient for her to understand everything and all of the requirements. If she has already exclaimed that when the Moor had done his duty, it was just so that he could go, then I guess all kinds of things just are not right in the land of Bohemia anymore.
That was very thoughtless and unjust of her, but it can be hoped that she reflects upon her reasoning and sees all things in the right light again, and then, accordingly, begins to act correctly. In addition to this, there is something else that the other group members must properly recognize. If one of you can truly find work that can be performed in the center, then furnish your night watch in such a form that alternately per night, 2 group members perform the watch. During that time, however, they should work on reaching the required financial means. For 2 days apiece, the 2 group members should alternate themselves between the watch and the work before the next 2 members take over this task for the following 2 days. The arrangement of the night watch, then, should be that your wife and Eva divide the watch and the work between themselves, then Jacobus and Madeline, then Elsie and Bernadette, and then Engelbert together with Mary. Also, any possible leisure time should be spent towards the necessary work. Otherwise, the required amount will not be acquired.
That is a damn hard route.
Certainly, but unfortunately, it is unavoidable.
Hopefully we can find suitable work and, moreover, within the required period of time. I am clumsy with just one hand.
You are not to participate in this work because you should finally try to do over again everything that you have neglected to do throughout all of the recent years. That is several times greater and harder work than what is to be performed by the group members as a result of the serious financial situation.
Nevertheless, I will also work if the time permits me and if I need a little variety.
Yes, certainly. You cannot omit that, and you also cannot go without variety, as I know. You can try this, but you cannot neglect the work for the mission any longer. You should promise me this.
I will, promise.
Your time will often be lacking for you, however, because you will occasionally be absent from the center.
What do you mean by that?
I speak of the fact that during the coming months and years, we will often order you to us, and will still have different jobs for you to perform, other than just those dealing with moderate instruction work.
Do you mean that I will not only have to perform my dictating and writing tasks?
Surely, because we still have different tasks for you, and we have also planned to inform you about different interests.
You are joking with me.
This must be, however.
Well, then it shall be. By the way, things will already start to get somewhat better with the writing once you transmit the reports to me.
Sure, I know. But you should still pay very much attention to your health.
It has, however, improved tremendously.
Certainly. Nevertheless, mindfulness and caution are necessary.
Of course, it has already looked bad enough.
That is correct. Some has improved itself, but now you must prepare for your circulatory system difficulties. They will lead to a health collapse in at least 2 years if you do not concern yourself better with this.
It will certainly improve again.
That is to be hoped for. But now, my friend, I would like to speak of those things concerning the future, which I promise to reveal to you at this time.
Fine, then fire away.
Sure, so listen. It will be.
One moment, please, because I still have a question before I forget it.
Just ask.
Good, thank you. To what extent is it necessary that the group members become involved in the work?
Even if only one does not invest himself or herself into this necessary measure, then a quick end will be inevitable. In addition, it is necessary that those group members who are not residents of the center and who only stay there occasionally also cooperate.
Good, that is clear. Then I would still like to ask about the time that you explained to me when, within some years, everything should have progressed so far that we would not have to work outside of the center anymore.
That was before we knew the precise data. After its cognizance, we have now recognized that the time will not be sufficient for some years if you cannot find significant employment that brings enough money into the center. This would also mean that external employment would still need to be executed for at least about 12 years. But this will allow itself to be regulated, as the coming time will prove. New insights which we receive during a look into the future promise that there is hardly a livelihood to be found in the center without external employment. Yet we await this because much can still change in this relation, even though it does not look likely in the distant future.
Thus we wait.
Sure, because we must first see how everything will turn out in the coming time. We cannot give ourselves high hopes, however, because one of the two possibilities of our look into the future shows that a livelihood resulting from work being performed in the center looks bleak.
Well, that is clear. Now I have a question about the teaching and the corresponding examinations.
Obviously, the lessons must be learned and be moderately studied further, but in accordance with the given circumstances, we must make some mandatory restrictions and exercise a certain indulgence. This does not mean, however, that we can accept non-effort and non-learning. We will simply make certain restrictions and exercise a little indulgence.
I find this to be right, but how are the examinations going to be accomplished now, and how does it stand with the printing of additional books?
With respect to the tests, I will instruct you during my next visit on Thursday or Friday, because we still have some points to clarify in this regard. Concerning the making of additional books, the arrangement that we already made is valid for the fulfillment of the 12-month period. If the 12 months prove themselves to be useful, then you should be producing 1 to 3 more books per year in the printing process, whereby these annually running enterprises, depending on the scale, will require a sum of 25,000 francs to be used.
Does it lie in our sole discretion, then, as to which writings we allow to be printed?
Sure.
Good, I think that this is fair. Do you have, in this connection, still further things for us?
No.
Very well. Then I only have a question regarding the Pfeifenberger family, and still a final question regarding the instruction of Madeleine, Dorrit, and Rose. I have carefully considered this point myself in the meantime, whereby I have also discovered that they, like also my wife, have very great difficulties with learning. Their problem, however, is actually with the language. For me, I simply have problems with time if I should also still settle these additional tasks. It would be much easier if the group members concerned would simply note all of those things that are unintelligible to them as questions, after which I could then take the time, at my sole discretion, to discuss those questions with them.
Sure, that is acceptable. You can handle it in such a manner. Regarding your wife, I know that quite severe linguistic problems exist for her because the German language is in no wise as familiar as the Swiss German language. For this reason, it is appropriate that you dedicate yourself to her in this regard, particularly for all of those things that she is not able to understand. On the other hand, it is also necessary that she gets together with someone else, in order also to learn in such a manner.
The latter she will do together with Beetle, but only when both feel in the mood for it.
Sure, it should therefore become a definitive form.
Of course, but teaching Earth females something is often worse than trying to teach a donkey how to brush its teeth.
You are wrong about that.
You are very careless.
I do not understand.
One might interpret your words, like also mine, in such a manner that you are misogynistic, as this has often been said about me.
But this is as far from you as it also is from me.
Of course, but you forget the role and position of women on the Earth.
But only because it sometimes appears to be an insurmountable thing to explain the logic of something to an Earthwoman.
Of course, but this does not want to be understood. It is then said that one wants to suppress women. Instead of it being accepted that one wants to teach them and give them the same rights as men, it is then, instead, completely misunderstood, and one falls under her hostility.
That is extremely illogical.
It is, however, still the case.
I did not say that in regards to your explanation, but because it is actually like that.
Oh, I see. Now, the women just always think that you want to wipe them out and trample them underfoot. I am sorry. You do not understand. By you, I of course mean one, thus that one wants to wipe them out and trample them underfoot.
The earthly women were, unfortunately, kept away from all knowledge and all rights for many millennia, which is why they still live in this role today.
Right, but now let's talk about the future. I did indeed interrupt you.
I will begin with this shortly, but for the time being, there is still the first part of your question, which I still have to answer. I discussed with you in detail about Ferdinand and Ingrid in regards to their new residence and its construction. I contemplated whether they are determined to make a branch center out of this home for you and carry out the necessary work in Austria. If they are willing to do this, then it will be of necessity that you go there and thoroughly inspect everything in order to give them the appropriate and necessary guidance. It will, unfortunately, be additional work for you, but it is also inescapable work.
This would give me some variety and be a nice change of air for me. Only, it is not completely clear to me as to how I am to cooperate in giving advice on the construction.
This will surely occur, for when you inspect everything, you will already know what your task will be. In any event, it is essential to ensure that a separate workspace is provided for you, according to your purpose and for you alone, because you will often be there and will work if everything can actually be furnished. Which, however, is very questionable because during a look into the future, I could not make a corresponding determination.
You already know a great deal of things.
Which brings us back to the subject, which would be, namely, the future.
Ah, right, then yes, you can now begin.
I will do this, otherwise we will drift more and more away from it. Thus, it will happen that the future will bring events which, on the one hand, will have a very malicious effect on the world and Earth humans, but which, on the other hand, will only be confirmation of what has been announced prophetically for several thousand years. Especially now, it also confirms what has been said since ancient times, that the Israeli people originally never were an actual people, but that this mass of people, in ancient times, singly and alone consisted of a gigantic group of degenerate and partially even criminal elements, who during their existence on earth at that time only incited discord, falseness, and war. Having come forth from the ones who were expelled, because they would not obey any order and were criminal, they assembled together in a mob in ancient times and formed the sham people of the Hebraeans, the Gypsies, who in their megalomania and in selfishness and egoism named themselves a chosen people who wanted to take up an elevated and ruling position over all terrestrial peoples, as is indeed known to you. But you also know that this sham people over a very long time always reached its goals. However, always only through murder, arson, the betrayal of friendships, and intrigues, and so forth, whereby they, the original forefathers of today's Israelis, were truly masters. Their distant descendants now, today's Israelis, respectively their responsible ones and their myrmidons can, like the USA, commit the worst crimes pitilessly and unhindered and with their secret services and military, right before the eyes of the world at large, and even with their approval. Not only that the Secret Service and military have criminal elements and trustworthy friends in many nations of earth, who they, as ever, simply brutally and bloodthirstily butcher as needed and to reach their goals. No, they also have, again like the USA, through their intrigues, also understood how to make the appropriate friends in the governments, the economic concerns and banks and so forth, or even creep into these themselves, so that their power has already grown to the degree that this cannot be grasped and perceived by Earth humans anymore. The last World War, the second, through which millions of Jews were massacred, which was truly unjust as you know, carries the great blame that this could even happen to such a degree, also because the USA with its allies decided the war in their favor. But blinded by that and full of false pity, Earth humans seek the friendship of the violent ones, but who in no wise merit this friendship and only take advantage of it for their criminal purposes. A fact that unfortunately also makes the peace-loving and upright Americans, Israelis and Jews in general, victims for the neo-Nazis, as well as for the other right-wing extremists and terrorists who should be persecuted and punished. A fact.
Man alive, you must be damned cautious about what you say here, because all of this could be interpreted as being neo-fascist and anti-Jewish. You also know that anti-Semitic machinations and the like constantly lead to legal procedures and even worse.
But these explanations are necessary for what I have to tell you in this context.
That may well be, but in spite of that, it is dangerous. It could endanger our entire mission, or at least attract murder attempts around my neck again.
If you are frightened, then we can abandon our mission.
Certainly not. But I ask myself whether I did right in this, to have questioned you regarding future events, when you now so openly speak of these things, which correspond to truth as I know, but which are damned hot.
I would have also spoken about it if you had not asked me about future matters.
I understand. Seemingly the coming world situation requires this.
Sure.
But in spite of that, this means quite a damn danger.
That also is correct. And it especially means a very great danger for yourself and for your life, because the fewest Earth humans will understand and want to understand that we only speak the truth and only spread the truth regarding these things, and that we ourselves, as well as you, in spite of that, regarding the human beings themselves, do not possess anti-American and anti-Israeli ambitions in any form and in regard to the integrity of these countries. Only few will understand that we only object to the murderous and false machinations of these named groups of Earth humans, and have to warn the rest of humankind about them. being the criminal state powers and the myrmidons and servants who belong to them, who, for their delusion and fanaticism as well as for their serfdom and profit greed, go without consideration over corpses, murdering, destroying, and terrorizing.
Naturally, but this explanation will probably not help much.
That may be, however, some will absorb the truth in spite of that.
That is a lot of damned use to me, if I am thereby to go to hell.
You can unfetter yourself from your duty if you are afraid, which you have, however, never done before.
Naturally not, because you indeed know that I cannot simply break a given promise. On the other hand, I ask myself why you suddenly came upon the crazy idea that I should be afraid. Should this perhaps be a psychological trick to cause me to persevere? Do you want to strike at my honor, so to speak, and thereby also address my own feelings of honor? That would be quite mean of you, because you know very precisely that I then...
You lose yourself in words, which you yourself do not accept as given. And you know also that I would never approach you with such ulterior motives.
Naturally, that would also be new to me. I only wanted to know the depth of your thoughts. Therefore, calmly tell me further. I will persevere, whether the devil comes out or stays in.
I knew that.
Then this small skirmish was superfluous.
Sure, but now listen. What I have already said, I had to explain, because the following can only be understood thereby. You know about the intrigues of the responsible ones, which are established through their secret service and are advanced or set off through revolutions and wars throughout the world. But you also know that through the American, Soviet, and Israeli Secret Service, murders, assassination attempts, and political murders are committed in very great numbers, and that the same secret services set off political confusions and topple governments and so forth. But what is still unknown to you and the Earth humans is the fact that in many revolutions and small wars, the powers directly take part and commit monstrous crimes. Not only that, they do not submit to the world order regarding atomic regulations, and continue to conduct nuclear trials and so forth, and consequently contravene all rules and regulations. No, they also pilfer and rob the required materials by murder and manslaughter. But far worse things yet are carried out through the military and through the Secret Service, in that they directly interfere in revolutions and wars of other peoples, and commit hundredfold and thousandfold murders. This, however, they do in the cunning and infamous manner that everything looks as if the directly involved ones, or any subgroups of these, are the guilty ones. Thus have U.S., America, and Israel already also directly interfered in the war between Iraq and Iran, in the breaking out of which they were likewise not uninvolved.
Did Israel bomb Iraq's reactor?
Paris. The French Secret Service is making serious accusations against Israel. 2 Israeli fighter planes are said to have flown an attack against an Iraqi nuclear reactor a fortnight ago. The Israelis had hoped that the act would be blamed on the hostile Persians. In the model reactor built by France, 2 French scientists had just completed a test when 2 unknown machines opened fire on the plant. The reactor contained 25 kilograms of enriched uranium. The attack had failed because the planes could not transport enough bombs due to the large flight distance. According to the intelligence service, the planes took off near Tel Aviv. Israel has warned several times against uranium deliveries to Iraq, fearing that the oil state could build a nuclear bomb.
Blick Zürich, Freitag, 17th Oktober 1980.
Secret Service Special Commandos, chiefly in Iraq, commit criminal and war criminal acts and undertakings, as also Israeli bombers openly bombard principal Iraqi positions, cities and atomic and oil centers, with the assumption that it would not be noticed that this concerns their military interference and their murderous cunning. However, they deceive themselves in this regard, because at least we are aware of their filthy machinations, and let these be given world publicity through you.
And you are of the opinion that the Earth humans will accept this from me, if I lay this before them, or try to explain.
A small group will recognize that you speak the truth.
That is much use then. Just consider that at this time there are more than 4,004,000,000 humans who must be convinced of the truth. Especially in US, America, and Israeli-friendly Switzerland, as well as in Germany, France, and in America, hell will be made hot for me when I spread your explanations further.
Sure, because in these nations especially, the evil powers have made many friends in governments and among the people, or they have their own people sit in authoritative governments and in the economic and financial world.
Ah, and it is still supposed to be simple for me?
I never uttered such a word. Neither I nor anyone else of us thinks that the task is easy for you. We also know that for you, life will be more difficult and the dangers will be greater yet.
Oh, how nice, but every prayer also includes an amen. Right?
Sure.
Good, I will indeed do what must be done. I am indeed used to annoyance. But why does it work out to always be these military and secret services? Already in earlier times it was them, and also today it is them again.
And it will still continue to be them further in the future.
And the humans become no smarter. Then cheers.
Unfortunately, it will still remain like this for a long time, as it will also be that the religions still long exercise power over the Earth humans and exploit them and lead them astray, this next to the military and secret services.
That is well known, and yet this also cannot be changed.
Sure, but still there exists no possibility to change the situation greatly. The possibility exists only in the form in which you conduct it. Small groups are required, which will spread in snowball fashion. But now, my friend, enough of that, because I still have to tell you about all kinds of important data and facts concerning the future, which I cannot explain in a few minutes. So I will likewise tell of the next upcoming events, which will become well known worldwide when they fulfill themselves. The first concerns the ballot for the new American president. It will be expressed worldwide that the lesser of two evils must be chosen. Therefore, the current President Carter will not hold his position any longer.
Carter unsuccessful with personal attacks.
During the election campaign, the incumbent U.S. President Jimmy Carter was primarily concerned with portraying his challenger as inexperienced in foreign policy, irresponsible and bellicose, but himself as a guarantor of world peace. Ronald Reagan reacted to the attacks with a more factual criticism. He accused Carter of failing with his weak and inconsistent foreign policy attitude towards problems such as the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, 10, L.P. 12, or the taking of hostages in Tehran, 25. 4. P. 68. In addition, Reagan made sharp attacks on the government's economic and social policy, which had led to a drastic increase in inflation and unemployment, as well as to high national debt. The confrontation between the candidates on a television program on the 28th of October was seen as possibly decisive for the election. According to a newspaper commentary, Carter appeared grim, while Reagan appeared to be the warmer personality.
Chronik 1980, Chronik Verlag Dortmund, 4th November 1980.
For this reason, the next great man of the United States of America will be President Ronald Reagan. A man who will cause everything to align through his upcoming actions, allowing the old prophecies to be fulfilled, from which it will slowly yet surely result that everything will begin to expand on the earth for the preparation of a worldwide war. The new president will be aggressive and eager to solve all problems through the use of military force and new armaments. This in contrast to his predecessor, who is likewise unsuitable, however, in his present position, as the new president will also be, who already exhibits some radical and extreme characteristics.
Ronald Reagan prevails over Jimmy Carter.
4th of Washington. Ronald Reagan becomes the new U.S. president. The Republican candidate has a surprisingly clear victory over incumbent President Jimmy Carter, 49 electoral votes, with 489 of the electoral votes cast by the people. The Republicans also win in the congressional and gubernatorial elections. In the House of Representatives, they gain 33 seats. The Democrats, however, remain in the majority with 243 to 192 seats. In the Senate, on the other hand, the Republicans have a majority for the first time in 25 years, with 53 seats to 47. Of the 13 governorships up for election, 7 will be filled by Republican representatives. Press commentaries said that the U.S. Americans had blamed Carter above all for the country's economic problems, which had forced many households to reduce their standard of living, or even deprived them of their livelihood. Carter had also speculated in vain that the U.S. citizens held hostage in Iran, 25.4. Paul Sinapinal, 68, would be released before the election. Reagan, on the other hand, had adopted a right-wing conservative course from the beginning, which corresponded to a widespread mood among the population. Carter concedes defeat before the polls close. He declares that he must accept the decision of the American people, even if I do not do so with the same enthusiasm as 4 years ago. Reagan asserts that he will try to reawaken the old great spirit of America that opened up a totally underdeveloped continent from coast to coast and made it a great nation. Republican campaign rally on 30th September in New York v. L. Nancy and Ronald Reagan with show star Frank Sinatra.
Chronik 1980, Chronik Verlag, Dortmund, 4th November 1980.
From film star to politician.
Ronald Reagan, born on 6 February 1911 in Tampico, U.S. state of Illinois, had an unusual career. He first worked as a sports reporter for radio and in 1937 began a career as a film star, mainly taking on cowboy roles. In all, Reagan appeared in 54 films until the 1960s, including Knute Rockne, All-American 1940, Kings Row 1942, The Hasty Heart 1950. In the early 50s, Reagan became a representative and advertiser for an electric multinational. During this time, his political views changed. The Liberal Democrat became more and more of a conservative. In 1962, Reagan joined the Republican Party and from then on became more and more involved in politics. In 1966, he was elected governor of California and was confirmed in office 4 years later. In 1968 and 1976, he tried in vain to become his party's presidential candidate. In the primaries for the nomination of the presidential candidates in 1980, Reagan initially got off to a bad start. Then, however, he was able to outdo his fiercest rival George Bush, whom he now wants to make vice president, and prevailed at the Conservative Party convention on the 16th of July, with 1,139 of the 1,094 delegate votes. During the actual election campaign, Reagan then deliberately presented himself as a moderate in order to counter accusations that he adhered to right-wing ideologies. Reagan is married since 1952 in second marriage to the actress Nancy Davis, with whom he has 2 children, Patricia and Ronald Jr. 2 other children, Maureen and Michael, come from his marriage to Jane Wyman, who was also a film actress, in 1940 and divorced in 1948.
Chronik 1980, Chronik Verlag, Dortmund, 4th November 1980.
Contrary to the erroneous opinion of the U.S. and the worldwide population, Reagan does not represent the lesser evil, but rather the larger, as the Earth humans will find out. In general, it can be said that very great errors are committed in regards to earthly presidential elections, in the fact that after 2, 3, or 4 years, a new presidency is always sought, and then a new president is determined for a country. Each new president lives with different ambitions and emotions, but also each new president has a different character, different plans, and different illogical understandings in reference to politics, etc. This leads to the fact that each new president or other person of power ignores and changes the preceding plans of his predecessor, whereby new errors develop again and again. The only right way would be for a truly good man to be chosen in the election, one who is free from all of those interests that are wrong and confused. This man would then be in office for as long as he is able to perform this role consciously and without confusion. Only in this manner could steady and good politics develop, expand, and become effective. After the presidential election in America, the next world-changing event will be that in Italy, the next major earthquake after Al-Asnam will occur, to which 4,000 Earth humans will fall victim.
Insufficient aid for earthquake victims in Italy.
23rd Nov, Naples. The southern Italian regions of Basilicata and Campania are shaken by a severe earthquake. About 3,100 human beings are killed, 9,000 others are injured. The number of homeless is estimated at 300,000. The earthquakes caused devastating damage in the area southeast of Naples, Italy's poorhouse. The villages of Sant'Angelo dei Lombardi, 5,000 inhabitants, and Campania, 12,000 inhabitants, are almost completely destroyed. In about 100 other villages and towns, many buildings are damaged, some considerably. Destruction also occurred in Naples and on the excavation site of Pompeii. The total damage is estimated at the equivalent of $35 billion. Only a few days after the earthquakes, the salvage and cleanup operations were heavily criticized. The Italian President Alessandro Pertini, who spent 2 days in the disaster region, declared in a televised speech that the relief measures were too slow and ineffective. Rapid assistance had failed to materialize, operation centers had not functioned, and serious deficiencies had occurred. Pertini attributes this failure, among other things, to the lack of implementing regulations for the law on aid in the event of natural disasters, which came into force in 1970. The government in Rome reacts to the accusations by providing emergency aid of 600 billion lira, 1.2 billion DM, and ordering the accommodation of about 170,000 homeless people in empty holiday hotels. However, many of those affected refuse to move into these shelters. Instead, they demand state support for the rapid reconstruction of their homes.
Chronik 1980, Chronik Verlag Dortmund, 23rd November 1980.
This quake will occur in the areas of the southwest, south, and southeast, as well as east of the Vesuvius volcano, causing immense damage to the buildings. The first major quake, having great destructive power and causing thousands of deaths, will result towards the end of the month of November of this year, after which then, over long periods of time, new tremblings of the earth will drive the populations into fear, as this will also be the case in Al-Asnam, where for the first time the earth will no longer come completely to rest, and 50 to 80 earthquakes will roll daily through the ground. In Al-Asnam, the number of deaths will, indeed, be 1,000 times higher than what will happen in Italy, but a greater danger awaits this in the boot country. The severe quake around Vesuvius will only be the beginning of a great number of similar disasters in Italy, but it should also be the starting point for further coming eruptions of the volcano, which will create more destruction in the future. The threatening eruptions of the volcano, however, will indicate that another world war comes within easy reach, and that its destructive work will begin and be carried out, without it being able to be prevented if the political and religious unreasonableness of the Earth humans should continue. For 2,000 years, the Earth human was given prophecies about these threats, but they only laughed at them, and all advice that was given was simply spoken into the wind. But they must bear the consequences for more and more of their irrationality, and the events in Italy should be the signs of this coming time. For since ancient times, the most monstrous crimes against earthly humankind were committed by this country, namely through Catholicism, whereby the Holy See, in particular, is responsible for this. Already in the beginning time, when the papacy and the Vatican were founded and brought to life in Rome, the most negative place existing in Italy was unconsciously selected for the residence of the Pope, the city of Rome, where the Vatican resided, from which, for almost 2,000 years, murder, enslavement, exploitation, deception, and every possible crime spread across the earthly world, and even other worlds in the universe and in distant, foreign galaxies did not remain spared from these vile, murderous, religious, and deadly deeds, because innocent extraterrestrial visitors on Earth were confronted with the madness of the religious cult of the Vatican, and, therefore, Catholicism, and succumbed to this delusional faith. And after their return to their homeworlds, their people living there were also infected by the acquired delusional faith until religious wars broke out. And that is why entire planets and even enormous solar systems have been destroyed. The Earth human should consider these facts at once and recognize from them how deadly the earthly religious cults truthfully are. And the Earth human should also think about why in ancient times Italy, the most negative place, was ever unconsciously chosen for the creation of the Vatican, and why just from there. Like many times before, the mark of death is set for the world when the Vesuvius volcano ejects its lava and thereby spreads great disaster. These are the facts, and it would be worthwhile for the Earth humans to think about them. Just as before and just as ever, however, there will be know-it-alls and cult religious believers who will say that the Vesuvius volcano is not in or near Rome, but rather is in the vicinity of Naples. These know-it-alls, however, do not know the conditions of the interior of the Earth, much like even the responsible scientists. Thus, they do not know that the main activity of the volcano does not lie directly under it, but lies directly and very deeply beneath the city of Rome. So in addition, those areas which will be shaken at the end of November will be caused partly by the magma eruption, water, and gas chambers, and be caused partly by tectonic shifts. This is to be said of the coming quakes in Italy, which find their beginning at the end of November of this year, and which will not end for a long time. But I must now depart from identifying in chronological order the events that are coming and return to this later. Before other major earthquakes follow in Italy, still several other things that are serious or simply important and moving for Earth humanity will occur around the world. Thus, the earthquake disaster in Italy will still be on the lips of the Earth humans when the next event occurs, which will deeply move millions of humans. In New York, it will happen that in the second week of December of this year, a man who is well known by the name of John Lennon will be murdered by a firearm.
Ex-Beatle John Lennon shot dead.
New York, 9th Niece, AP, AFP. John Lennon, the 40-year-old British composer and co-founder of the legendary Beatles, who broke up in 1971, was shot dead outside his New York residence on Tuesday night. Lennon was considered the intellectual mastermind and, together with bassist Paul McCartney, the musical heart of the most successful band in the history of pop music. Lennon's suspected murderer, a 25-year-old man from Hawaii, was arrested by the police shortly after the crime. After the news of his death had spread like wildfire, Thousands of John Lennon's admirers gathered in front of his house during the night, where they remained in respectful silence or quietly hummed melodies of the murdered man. Ringo Starr, the former drummer of the Beatles, left for the USA immediately after the death was announced, without making any statements. Paul McCartney, who co-created almost all of the group's hits with Lennon, reacted to the news by saying, "I just can't believe it yet." George Harrison, the Beatles' former lead guitarist, was nowhere to be found on Tuesday. Our picture shows Lennon's widow Yoko Ono Center leaving New York's Roosevelt Hospital, where Lennon had been taken after the assassination. Picture AP.
Tagesanzeiger, Zürich, Mittwoch, 10th December 1980.
His character is that he is a musician, and he was formerly a member of the Beatles group. He will be murdered by a religiously misguided one named Chapman, who, moreover, suffers from delusional ideas caused by erroneous religious teachings. As this will appear more and more in the extreme with those who have succumbed to the delusional religious cults and sects in the United States of America.
Autograph stalker shoots Beatle John Lennon.
New York, Ninth Deck DDP AFP-AP. Millions of Beatles fans around the world reacted to the murder of John Lennon, who was shot dead outside his New York flat on Monday evening local time, 2 months after his 40th birthday, with dismay and grief, mixed in with fits of crying and screams from fans at public demonstrations. Immediately after the killing, police arrested Mark David Chapman, 25, a native of Hawaii, on suspicion of murdering the world-famous British musician, composer, and lyricist with 5 gunshots. The motive of the perpetrator, who was said to have asked Lennon for an autograph a few hours before the attack, was initially unclear. The ex-Beatle had been working on recordings together with his wife Yoko Ono and his producer Jack Douglas in a New York studio on Monday evening. Later, the Lennon couple went to dinner and wanted to go home afterwards. According to the police, Chapman, who was later arrested, approached them when they arrived in front of the house in the Upper West Side, one of the best residential areas of New York, and fired the fatal shots at the musician from his .38 caliber pistol. Lennon shouted, "I'm hit!" and then collapsed amid nervous laughter from the shooter. The doorman of the so-called Dakota House C-Box on 72nd Street, not far from Central Park, then asked the murderer, "Do you know what you have just done?" He replied, "I just shot John Lennon," and dropped his gun. When the police arrived at the scene shortly afterwards, Chapman was still standing in the entrance hall of the house. According to eyewitnesses, he had been in New York for a week. On the afternoon before the murder, he had asked Lennon for an autograph when he left the house and had also received it. Afterwards, he had been hanging around outside the building for more than 6 hours, waiting for the musician to return. Scenes of mourning at the scene. Meanwhile, there were harrowing scenes among Lennon's supporters outside the house. Hundreds had gathered shortly after the assassination with flowers and burning candles, whose light illuminated the darkness. Many fans sobbed or cried out loudly. Others played from tape recorders or sang Lennon's world-famous songs. Born on the 9th of October 1940 in the English port city of Liverpool, John Winston Lennon formed a band in 1958 with the musicians Paul McCartney and George Harrison, which Ringo Starr joined in 1962, and which achieved worldwide fame under the name The Beatles. Lennon was considered the intellectual of the group. His song Power to the People earned him a reputation as a revolutionary. At the height of the group's fame, he caused a scandal with the claim, "The Beatles are more famous than Jesus." After a first marriage to the Englishwoman Cynthia Powell, from whom came their son John Julian, born in 1963, he married the Japanese Yoko Ono in 1969, with whom he also has a son. When the Beatles broke up in 1970, Lennon made several recordings with Yoko Ono before almost completely retiring from the profession in 1975 after the birth of his second son, Sean, to devote more time to his family. After a long battle with the American authorities, who had charged him with drug possession, the couple were able to settle in New York in the 1970s. Lennon loved New York. In his last interview, John Lennon explained that he liked living in the American city of millions because he had a feeling of security there. In conversation with BBC disc jockey Andy Peebles last Saturday, Lennon said, "Here I can go to the cinema or restaurants. For the past 7 years, I have been walking the streets. When I left England, I could not even walk around our apartment block. When I went out, I was afraid that human beings would approach me or attack me. It took me 2 years to overcome this. Now they occasionally ask for a signature, but they don't bother you." DDP.
Tagesanzeiger Zürich, Mittwoch, 10th December 1980.
Lennon murderer currently under investigation.
New York, 10th Dece AFP/AP, the autopsy of ex-Beatle John Lennon, murdered in New York on Monday night, has revealed a lung hemorrhage as the cause of death. According to the New York Medical Examiner's Office, the shots were probably fired from a distance of more than 50 centimeters, as no gunpowder traces remained. Meanwhile, the trial of Mark David Chapman, arrested for Lennon's murder, has been postponed until the 6th of January. According to judicial circles, the state of mind of the accused is to be examined first. The prosecutor demanded that Chapman be sent to prison immediately. He claimed that Chapman, contrary to initial assumptions, had a criminal record after all. He is said to have been convicted of burglary during his vagabond life between Texas, Georgia, and Hawaii for burglary and robbery. To protect him from a possible suicide attempt, the accused was under constant surveillance on Tuesday and Wednesday after it became known that Chapman had had to undergo treatment by a psychiatrist for 2 suicide attempts. According to police sources, the accused had attributed his motive for committing the crime to voices and the devil. According to his public defender, he had been a Beatles fan since his early youth. In Chapman's hotel room, cassettes with Beatles recordings had been found. At the time of the crime, he had a cover of Lennon's last album, Double Fantasy, signed by his victim. Lennon's widow, the Japanese Yoko Ono, published details of his funeral through the Spirit Foundation founded by her husband in New York. There will be no funeral service, but towards the end of the week, there will be a call for a silent prayer for the murdered man. In lieu of flowers, the widow asks that donations be made to the Spirit Foundation and concludes, "John loved human beings."
Tagesanzeiger Zürich, Thursday, 11th December 1980.
Chaos at memorial concert for John Lennon.
Liverpool, 14th Dec AP, there was chaotic, threatening conditions at a concert in memory of ex-Beatle John Lennon, who was murdered in New York, in his home city of Liverpool on Sunday. Several thousand of the 30,000 or so fans gathered in the concert hall stormed the stage, leaving over 100 injured and several fainting. The incident occurred just over halfway through the 7-hour concert at St. George's Hall, during which local pop groups played old Beatles hits. Apparently, some of the fans were angry because a band suddenly started playing other songs as well. The organizers of the concert repeatedly asked the outraged Beatles fans to remain calm. The musicians left the stage and additional police teams arrived. The fans had flocked to the English port city from all over Great Britain and some also from other European countries. Former disc jockey Bob Wooler, who used to work at the Cavern Club from where the Beatles started their triumphal procession around the world, said after the concert that there had not been anything like it in Liverpool since the days of Beatles fever. None of the other three Beatles, who all turned their backs on Liverpool years ago, had come to the memorial concert. Lennon's widow, Yoko Ono, had invited her dead husband's followers around the world for Sunday, 20 HERCET, for memorial services. Nearly 100,000 youth gathered in Central Park in New York for an event arranged by Mayor Ed Koch. A minute's silence was followed by a half-hour concert of Beatles music from a band. Similar events took place at the corresponding local time in many other cities in the USA and the rest of the world.
Tagesanzeiger Zürich, Montag, 15. Dezember 1980.
Another event goes into action with the coming climate, which will already be at hand in October and which especially concerns the northern hemisphere of the Earth. I already explained to you earlier that in this specific case, the whole Earth will slowly become a flood-prone area. However, the climate will also continue to change in such a manner that icy cold weather will fall over the regions of the Earth because a new cooling time inevitably approaches, whereby the overall view of the Earth will change once again. In the north, completely domesticated birds already begin annually to draw to the warmer south for the winter, and already in 100 years, these feathered animals will no longer have a home in the north. Today, many animals still living in the northern areas migrate. On the other hand, to the south, or they already begin to change themselves in their entire anatomy, etc., in order to adapt themselves to the new and approaching cold climate. Many kinds will begin to change themselves into other forms, which can be determined soon by the earthly scientists, whereby they are able to then exist in the new climate. Thus, the picture of the animal world will, at other times, change itself, and new forms of faunal life will revive the soil, while the earth human must also take upon himself or herself many changes, and cannot avoid the renewed change. The signs of the times will increase continuously, whereby these signs are always, unfortunately, of a negative form. There are signs which have been called for since ages ago in the prophecies, but the earth human did not pay any attention to these. They would have been very much able to prevent these dreadful events from happening if the prophecies would have been attentively followed and if he or she would have taken good heed of them. They always ignored them, however, and they disturbed the entire planet itself, as well as all of its life forms. But now they will receive their wages for this, which will be very bitter. The time has now come in which all things increase negatively, and the prophecies literally begin to fulfill themselves. The culprits, in particular, have been called to account and have been eliminated, but only until they arrange greater havoc. There are also those who will not be spared from their destruction, who have slandered extraterrestrials, and through their lies that they have created about us, live in material glory. All those who have accumulated greedy profits from our existence and created false cult religious sects, associations, and organizations built on lies, saying that they would stand in contact with us or other extraterrestrial life forms, and that we would advocate the cult religions, will have an evil end and die by their own believers, or at least be ostracized by them. In particular, those frauds are called to account by their believers, who steal your material and try to evaluate this in their favor. There have already been many who have done this, and there will still be many more in the future, but it will be the case that their shameful actions will bring them harm sooner or later. And now, further chronological predictions concerning the coming months and years are as follows. Around the time of the 19th of January 1981, Japan will be shaken by an earthquake, which we have calculated at about a strength of 8 on the Richter scale known to you. This quake, which will occur without causing major catastrophes, despite its strength, will be deemed as a sign of the completion of the Iranian-American hostage affair.
Hostage issue, war of nerves to the end.
Washington, Algiers, Frankfurt, 19th John AP DDP AFP. The nerve-wracking wait for the release of Americans held in Iran for 443 days continued until late Monday night. Iran's chief negotiator, Behzad Nabawi, accused the U.S. of resorting to last-minute dodges and delaying the release of the 52 hostages. According to Nabawi, American banks allegedly submitted an 11-page addendum to the Algiers agreement initialed by American Ambassador Warren Christopher on Monday morning. According to statements by John Dratner, spokesman for the U.S. State Department in Washington, the release of the hostages was delayed because of difficult contract clauses. He said the U.S. and Iran were working to fulfill the conditions calmly and carefully. Reports from Washington said Iran had made an additional demand. On Monday evening, the outgoing U.S. President Jimmy Carter finally gave up his intention to personally receive the hostages in Wiesbaden FRG as his last official act after their release. He must personally attend the handover of office to his successor Ronald Reagan on Tuesday. Reagan, however, wants to send his predecessor to Wiesbaden as his personal representative. Carter's spokesman Jody Powell announced that the former president had accepted this offer. In a commentary by Radio Tehran on Monday evening, it was said that Carter could now derive no personal propaganda benefit from the hostage drama. According to U.S. diplomatic circles, the initialing of the agreements by U.S. Deputy Foreign Minister Warren Christopher in Algiers would give the documents full validity. However, it was further announced that the agreements would also include a 72-hour declaration period for both sides, during which either party could withdraw from them. This could be another reason for the delay in the release. U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Warren Christopher and his Algerian counterpart Mohammed Ben Yahya, who is acting as mediator in the hostage crisis, signed an agreement to end the hostage crisis in Algiers on Monday morning. Iranian chief negotiator Behzad Nabawi announced in an interview with Radio Tehran that the hostages would be released as soon as the Algerian government informed Tehran that the USA had transferred the Iranian assets frozen in America to an account at the Bank of England. According to a report by the Iranian news agency Pars, Nabawi announced on Monday afternoon that it would then be up to Algeria to transfer the assets from Great Britain to Algiers. The Iranian government was apparently still awaiting notification from Algeria on Monday evening that the transaction had been completed. Nabawi added that the hostages had been thoroughly examined by 6 Algerian doctors. Nabawi thanked the Algerian government for its mediation services as well as the occupants of the American embassy for taking a revolutionary act by taking hostages on the 4th of November. There were different reports from Washington on Monday about how the formalities were handled. An American government official explained that the Iranian assets had not yet been transferred to the escrow account due to minor technical difficulties. This explains the delay in the release of the hostages. In contrast, a report by the American television company ABC later stated that the funds had been released and were in the right place. U.S. President Jimmy Carter, still in office, confirmed the agreement between Algiers and Washington in a television address early on Monday morning. He also thanked the Algerian government for its mediation, raising hopes that efforts to secure the release of the Americans would be successful before the end of his term, which ends on Tuesday. The prospects of Carter being able to personally welcome the hostages to European soil in the event of their release, however, dwindled visibly on Monday in view of the delay. Reagan Forum's crisis team. U.S. President-elect Ronald Reagan has formed a mixed crisis team of experts from the Carter administration and his own cabinet to deal with the hostage issue. This was announced on Monday by the incoming White House spokesman. James Brady announced, The crisis team will be headed by the new Secretary of State, Alexander Haig.
Tagesanzeiger, Zürich, 20th January 1980.
On the same day at 21, Chigahers, the American hostages are to be released. But this will be prevented by the power of the Ayatollah Khomeini because he will want to meet with the departing American president, Jimmy Carter, and, therefore, will not grant him the victory. For this reason, at the last moment, he will prevent the release of the prisoners, so that this release will not occur until the next day, the 20th of January 1981, at around 1823 Hrs. For the time being, this will end the largest criminal extortion on the face of the earth, which will, however, have very serious consequences for the Iranian people and their government at a later time. The first time, the Iranians will be of the wrong opinion that they have achieved a victory by the criminal extortion and subsequent release of the prisoners. But they will soon recognize all sorts of the inconvenience and ruin that they bargained for. But their remorse and insight into their crazy direction and into their fanaticism will come too late. In particular, the new U.S. President, Ronald Reagan, will emphasize his power in order to retaliate against Iran. And that this will be so, like also many other very senseless and terrible things that lead to murder and war, is ensured by a man who works closely with President Reagan, namely, a war and intrigue fanatic, like Reagan himself, a man named Haig, who has already caused much political mischief.
Ronald Reagan, who will take office as U.S. President in January 1981, appoints former NATO Supreme Allied Commander Alexander Haig as his Secretary of State. 4. Leotspe Semi 8.
Chronik 1980, Chronik Verlag, Dortmund, 16th December 1980.
In particular, Reagan will become unforgiving towards Iran when he is informed more precisely about the fact that the U.S. hostages in Tehran had to suffer under torture and still have more to suffer.
Signs of severe mistreatment.
Wiesbaden, 21st Jan AP. Some of the American hostages returned from Iran on Wednesday show signs of severe mistreatment, according to a U.S. spokesman. Details of the ways in which the 52 were mistreated during their 444-day captivity were not available at this time from spokesman Jack Cannon. However, he announced in Wiesbaden that more information would be released as medical examinations progressed. A former hostage, Larry Collins, who was released a few weeks after the storming of the American embassy in Tehran on the 4th of November 1979, had testified on Tuesday evening that the guards had threatened the hostages with weapons and played Russian roulette with the two female embassy staff members in order to extract information from them. Vice Consul Richard Queen, released last summer on health grounds, reported that he and other Americans were mock-faced before a firing squad. Statements from the hostages released earlier have so far been withheld so as not to endanger the hostages held in Iran.
Tagesanzeiger, Zürich, Thursday, 22nd January 1981.
The next events in chronological sequence are that Indonesia will be shaken by an earthquake, which will kill several hundred people, while on the same day, namely on the 24th of January 1981, China will also be afflicted by another major earthquake in the territory of the province of Sichuan. There will be many deaths to lament over, which will be calculated in the thousands.
Hundreds dead in quake.
Beijing, Jakarta. SDA, DPA, AP, severe earthquakes have claimed the lives of hundreds of human beings and caused extensive damage in southern China and Indonesia. An overview of the consequences of the earthquakes in southern China, which reached a magnitude of 6.0 on the open Richter scale, was not yet possible because news connections to the disaster area were also interrupted on Sunday, according to official reports. There were also only a few reports on the extent of the severe quake 3,500 kilometers southeast of Jakarta in the Indonesian province of Irian Jaya Ta of Saturday, as connections to this area are very difficult. Reports received in Jakarta only 3 days after the disaster on Saturday spoke of more than 100 dead, presumably 2 villages completely destroyed and more than 200 missing. According to official figures, the quake in Indonesia measured 6.2 on the Richter scale, and its epicenter was off the coast. Mountain Town destroyed official Chinese reports on Sunday spoke of over 250 dead and over 300 injured in the southern Chinese province of Sichuan. However, it was feared that the death toll was much higher, as almost all the houses in the county town of Dafu collapsed. The town of 20,000 inhabitants is located in the mountainous western part of Sichuan. The sparsely populated surrounding area is mainly inhabited by Tibetan herders. According to Chinese seismologists, the epicenter was close to this small town, which is situated in a mountain valley 240 kilometers northwest of the provincial capital Chengdu. Rescue teams are on their way to the earthquake zone from Chengdu and other cities with medicine, food, tents, and clothing. The quake in southern China occurred early on Saturday, 5:13 HR's local time. It was also exceptionally strong in other areas of Sichuan province, according to seismologists' reports. No information has been released about damage in these areas. Sichuan, China's most populous province with 90 million human beings, was last shaken by a major earthquake in 1976 when it reached 7.3 on the Richter scale. The number of dead was kept secret at the time. In the same year, the Manchurian industrial city of Tangshan in northeastern China was turned into a wasteland of rubble. According to official figures, 242,000 human beings died in Tangshan and the surrounding area. At the time, the authorities were late in revealing the full extent of the disaster.
Tagesanzeiger, Zürich, Monday, 26th January 1981.
As usual, however, the Chinese authorities will indicate a much smaller number of victims than what corresponds to the truth. In addition to such serious and tragic events, other things will happen in the world, such as in the field of crime. To make any predictions about this in a graduated form would be pointless because the entire level of crime in all countries is heavily rising. Thus, it is only worthwhile to say something about such issues in chronological order, and only then if it is of interest for the whole or a large part of the world's population. With our calculations, we have not only discovered serious criminal matters, but also innumerable insignificant issues that would only interest a few human beings. Under these insignificant criminal incidents, events will also enter again and again, which I personally find to be amusing, in spite of the criminal background. Thus, I have noted 2 events that will happen at about the time of the earthquake in China, and which I do not want to withhold from you because I just find them to be amusing, and because the events will be so illogical that I cannot gain any sense from them. In St. Gallen, after a lengthy tour of Switzerland, an American singer and songwriter, Percy Sledge, will be betrayed by his manager, who will steal not only the singer's wages and escape therewith, but also his bus and all of his musical instruments.
Manager disappeared with salary and instruments.
St. Gallen, 23rd Jan PSG, black singer Percy Sledge and his 8-member Dutch health band are sitting in the St. Gallen Hotel Eckehard without a centime of money in their pockets because their tour manager has secretly absconded with their fee. The singer from the U.S. state of Alabama is on a European tour with his band. With great success, he made guest appearances in Switzerland in Zurich, Basel, Bern, Lucerne, and most recently in St. Gallen. Without paying the hotel bill, The West German agent of the internationally known singer, who landed million-dollar hits A Man Loves a Woman, especially at the end of the 60s, disappeared at 4 o'clock on Tuesday morning. The manager disappeared with over 25,000 francs in a VW bus containing the instruments of the health band. The day before, he had had the money paid out to him after Sledge's last performance in Switzerland with his evergreens at the St. Gallen Dancing Babalu.
Tagesanzeiger, Zürich, Monday, 26th January 1980.
The theft of money makes some sense, but I think it is amusing that the vehicle and the musical instruments will also be stolen, which the manager cannot begin to do anything with. Just as incomprehensible and amusing, I think, is that in the Zoological Park of Copenhagen, a young elephant will be stolen, also at around the same time.
Copenhagen, elephant stolen from your zoo.
Copenhagen, 25th Jan AP. The manhunt for an 8-centimeter young elephant stolen from Copenhagen Zoo has been fruitless as of Sunday. The pachyderm was put on the wanted list throughout Denmark, and German and Swedish border authorities were ordered to keep an eye out for unusual cargo. The weighty baby elephant Sonia had been stolen away, so to speak, from under the trunks of 2 adult conspecifics on Saturday night. The trail led to a large hole cut in the zoo fence, through which the thieves had apparently led the little one out, and to a waiting truck. Suspicion focused on a pair of Yugoslavian artists who had brought Sonia from India via Yugoslavia to Denmark 2 months ago.
Tagesanzeiger, Zürich, Monday, 26th January 1980.
Despite the criminal aspects, I somehow find such incidents to be amusing because they only result from such illogicalness. But enough with that, because I still have to explain many other upcoming and important events to you. Thus, it is to be said that after the earthquakes that were mentioned to occur in Indonesia and China, in South Africa, severe floods will afflict the country, while in Iceland, it will follow that a volcano will erupt, discharging immense masses of glowing lava.
Presumably more than 200 humans killed severe storm catastrophe at the Cape.
Cape Town, 26th of January, Reuter, DDP. Heavy rains, floods, and hurricane-like storms led to a severe weather disaster in South Africa's Cape Province. More than 200 humans are presumed to have lost their lives. In the small town of Laingsburg alone, about 300 kilometers east of Cape Town, 119 humans died when the Buffalo River burst its banks, according to police reports. Almost 700 houses were destroyed by the raging waters. Many residents have taken refuge on the roofs of their houses and are waiting to be evacuated by air. Further reports on Monday from the southwest of the province, which was particularly affected by heavy rains and hurricane-like storms, spoke of several dozen humans missing. The most important railway and road connections from Cape Town to the north and east were interrupted by masses of water and trees uprooted by the storm. According to the Weather Office in Pretoria, there is still no end in sight to the storm. In the center of the disaster area, up to 150 millimeters of rain fell during storms with a force of around 100 km/h over the weekend. According to initial official statements, this is the worst storm disaster in this province since 1934.
Tagesanzeiger, Zürich, Tuesday, 27th January 1980.
This volcano, however, is located far away from inhabited areas, which is why no human lives will be taken and no damage will have to be lamented. Then follows the first major political impact of the U.S. President Reagan, who will flip the world on its head with terroristic measures. The first of his great acts will already become known at the end of the month of January 1981 and at the Eichschutz's beginning of the month of February 1981, which is that he will reach out to murderous dictatorships and regimes of small countries and clear the way for them for the enslavement, oppression and murder of their populations. The military aid, which he will award to these countries, will produce very weighty and negative consequences.